are going to be talking nice water today. And so just want to thank the folks from Christians for Free Palestine for being here, Jonathan and Sarah and Cole, and to Rebecca Arov, who is going to be another QMP person who's going to be calling in a little bit later. Oops, here comes Rebecca. Let's see. Rebecca is picking up their family from the airport. So we're going to have a lot of parents in the room, which is very nice. And let me see. Everyone good? Okay. It's sometimes I get confused when I can only see myself. Sorry. Like, where'd everybody go? So, welcome everyone. Welcome to Queer Mikveh Project. We are so grateful for everyone for joining us today. To remind you, if you need to take a bio break or you need to just turn your camera off or just be chilling, totally okay. We encourage everyone to have your camera on so we can see you and people can interact. But if that's not an option for you, that's okay. Please introduce yourself in the chat. We would love to know who you are, where you're coming from, what land you're on today. Again, my name is Rebecca Maria Goldschmidt. I'm an artist. I live in Japan. I'm currently in Tokyo. And have curly black hair. I'm wearing a keffiyeh, a Palestinian scarf, and a tie-dyed t-shirt. And I have a white background. And I'm going to pass it to Oren for a little bit of tech information, and then I'll give an announcement about security. So Oren, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Oren. It's great to see everyone. I use they or any pronouns. I am one of today's tech support team. So we just want to make sure that everyone knows today's session is being recorded. Somewhere on your screen at the bottom of the Zoom app or window, you can find the CC icon for showing captions. And if you have any issues, tech issues, you can find me and send me a private chat by finding participants. And then my name has a little asterisk, tech support, Oren, and you can send me a direct chat. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Oren. So one thing I just want to add is that anything that is inappropriate or uncool that is said in the chat is going to be just ignored. And if it's hateful or hurtful to someone, we will remove you from the Zoom room. So those are our sort of ground rules for this space. Again, we would love to see your faces if that's cool. And yeah, we just want everyone to feel welcome. Please ask questions in the chat. We are going to be collecting any questions you have and adding them to very brief Q&A at the end. We have a lot to talk about, so really just want to give the platform and the mic over, to the folks from Christians for Free Zionism. Oh my God, Christians for Free Palestine, Christians for Free Palestine. I'm having mouth problems. Here we go. So first I'm just introduce everyone who's here today, and then we'll get into our questions. We have Jonathan. Jonathan, maybe you could wave. We're going to put the full bio in the chat, but I'll just read the first line. Jonathan is a Palestinian American Christian and a national leader of Christians for Free Palestine. So welcome, Jonathan. We also have Cole. Welcome, Cole. Cole Parke-West studied theology at Texas Lutheran University, earned their master's in conflict transformation at Eastern Mennonite University's Center for Justice and Peace Building, and has been working at the intersections of faith and justice as an activist, organizer, and scholar for more than 20 years. So thanks, Cole, for being here. And Sarah's also in the room. Welcome, Sarah. Sarah Nahar, she is a nonviolent action trainer and interspiritual theologian. And she also is a member of Tzedek Lab and also just finished 2 terms with the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. I'm just throwing that in there, Sarah, for you. So welcome to this brilliant team. And yeah, so we're gonna get started, and I'm just gonna start with the first question, which is for Jonathan. What is Christian Zionism historically and today? And what role has it played in propping up the settler colonial project of Israel? We'll just go from there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rebecca, and it's so good to be here for with this group and for this particular purpose. And Queer Mikveh is just such an awesome organization. So thank you for that. And to answer a question about Christian Zionism, it is a colonial theology in that it both was born out of the center of the British Empire, and also is a theology that promotes colonization. Christian Zionism is a political and theological ideology that uses Christian texts to support the creation and sustaining of the modern nation state of Israel, out of the belief that Israel has a cosmic purpose in bringing about the end times, which will culminate in the second coming of Jesus and the end of the world. Basically, it's Christians who believe that Israel is, that the nation state of Israel is specially chosen by God. And for me, any theology that holds that certain groups of people are chosen while other groups of people are not chosen or are enemies of God is racist and is heretical. And it's important to recognize that Christian Zionism predates Jewish Zionism, Jewish political Zionism, by about 50 years. Theologians in the British Empire were obsessed with the idea that they could take the Jews within Britain, remove them from their society out of their anti-Semitism, and move them into Palestine. The theology was very much tied to ideas around empire. It came from Britain having more access to Palestine because of their colonial rule. And it came from the idea that they could participate in kind of God's plan to end the world. And that idea got picked up by fundamentalist Christians in the US, who used it to promote a Christian theology that used the Bible as a fortune-telling device. So any ethical teachings from the Bible didn't need to apply quite as much. All that you needed to do was make sure that you were following God's game plan, or battle plan, I should say, that God spelled out in the Bible that was going to be happening in the future. And particularly when the state of Israel was established in 1948, fundamentalists were able to say, look, we were right. And then again in 1967, when Israel took over Jerusalem, fundamentalists were able to say, we predicted this, and we were right about that. We must be right about integration being a sin. We must be right about interracial marriage being a sin. We must be right about women's rights being sinful. We must be right about queer people being damned and sinful. And so it's a ideology that, or Christian Zionism has been used by fundamentalists to prove their racist ideology throughout time. I'll pause there and let Cole or Sarah share a bit more about what Christian Zionism looks like today.
Well, I'll just quote Jonathan, as I've heard him say before, that Christian Zionism is the foreign policy of Christian nationalism in the United States. And I know we are a group that goes beyond those borders today, for which I'm very grateful. But to speak particularly to the empire here, in a time of an election in which many of us in the room may feel a lot of liberal hysteria about what we need to do in order to prevent the worst happening, it's worth really taking a step back from that and looking at the connections of Christian nationalism and Christian Zionism and some of these other patterns, so that we're able to sustain ourselves and our communities as we navigate the very challenging waters of an election year, and we put forth theologies and like political projects that can very much, I'll say, navigate again, more water metaphors, just move through these times with much sturdier invitation than comes every 4 years. Anything else, Cole?
Yeah, I'll just add that, so I'm Cole, they, them pronouns, so glad to be with you all. Part of my background was with Political Research Associates, which is a social justice think tank that researches the right wing. And my official job title was LGBTQ and gender justice researcher. My friends generally knew me as a queer spy. But the thing about the right wing is that the facets of the right wing that I was studying, those that presented the greatest threat to LGBTQ people, to reproductive justice, are the same people who are working on all kinds of other issues that affect lots of other different communities. So Amara Jones is a brilliant Black trans woman. I once heard her say that the left is really good about talking about intersectionality and the right is really good about doing it. So they effectively find common cause, even if they don't share entire ideologies, and they work in concert to advance a particular agenda. And so in my research, tracking largely right-wing American Christians, I don't know if y'all remember, in 2017, I think, is when the US Embassy, Donald Trump moved the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, right? And he was very clear when he did this. He said, I'm doing this for the evangelicals. And what was interesting to me, and as that played out, was in looking at the pictures of the event, all of the right-wing evangelical pastors that I was tracking for my section of the research, who were really concerned with LGBTQ people, were all present. They all had front row seats to that event. And so it was, for me, the first time that I started really paying attention to what is the relationship between the anti-LGBTQ right and the dynamics of Christian Zionism that are embedded within many of the facets of the US right.
I just want to jump off of what Cole said real fast to name two other facets that we didn't quite name, and one is extreme and open anti-Muslim rhetoric and actions. Within their framework, Muslims and Arabs, and they rarely differentiate between the two, are both enemies of God, getting in the way of God's plan, according to them, because they are not in support of Israel's colonization of Palestine. And then the second group that is affected by Christian Zionism is Jews themselves. The Christian Zionists believe that in the end, Jews, Muslims, and all non-Christians, actually many of them all non-Protestant, will be ultimately damned. And so this philo-Semitism, this fetishization of Jews for the purposes of enacting a Christian plan, is itself anti-Semitic. And studies have shown that people who hold these Christian Zionist and Christian nationalist beliefs tend to also hold some of the strongest anti-Semitic beliefs as well. So I think it's important to recognize that while these folks claim themselves as pro-Israel, they are also very much anti-Jewish.
Thank you all so much. Like, I know everyone in the room right now is like, wow, because so many of us have heard of, well, many of us are familiar with Zionism from a Jewish perspective, or the idea of Zionism in that mindset of Jewish supremacy in Israel, Jewish supremacy, a Zionist concept of a Jewish state. But to see the sort of broader picture of what Christian Zionism is and how that is so deeply tied to American politics and the American, continuation of the sort of manifest destiny of American self-identity, that is very key to for all of us to also, how do we change the situation? How do we contribute to a free Palestine if we cannot understand the sort of underlying concepts and sort of structures that are making that happen, which one of them is hugely Christian Zionism, especially with money. How is that going to happen? So thank you for laying that out. So our next question is, what are you guys doing? How are you organizing Christian community for Palestinian liberation? And I know there's a lot to talk about here, so yeah, please, everyone can jump in, I think. Go ahead.
I'll kick us off with a little bit of the origin story, because to be clear, this is not Christians for Free Palestine as an organization is not the first time that Christians have done anything in this realm, but in this particular political moment, probably by like October 10th, and I'll explain that I've spent much of the last 5 years working primarily in solidarity with Jewish communities in the South, and I've been a dues-paying member of JVP for a long time, and so as things were transpiring in October, I, like probably everyone on this call, was turning up in the streets and taking action and coming into formation. And pretty quickly, a lot of my Jewish friends were like, "What are the Christians doing?" And I said, I don't know. I don't actually hang out with very many Christians, but I'll go find out. And so started asking around, and a lot of Christians were indeed mobilizing alongside Jewish and Muslim and Arab-led movements. But Christians were not effectively mobilizing and organizing as Christians. The Mennonites started to get their things together sooner than others. And so Mennonite Action came into being in November, I think. And I reached out to the leaders of that very specific denominational project and was like, hey, can we just make this ecumenical? Can we just like bring all the Christians in? And they wisely said, no. There are a lot of Christians and we need to stay specifically focused on organizing Mennonites because, you know, part of what enables powerful organizing is to be rooted in particular traditions and identities. So instead, I invited myself to their first national action in DC and said, well, then like I really want to learn from you all and see if we can replicate this model in other denominations. Yes, thanks, Sarah. Y'all should track Mennonite Action. They're also doing incredible work. And so I participated in their first big national action in DC in January. And that was where Jonathan and Sarah and I met in person for the first time. And by that time, you know, we'd begun having other conversations with other Christians and other Christian groups, and noticed that there really was a missing piece of a large Christian movement taking bold action, and the time has come. So maybe I'll pause there. Jonathan, do you want to pick up the story?
Sure. So we started pulling from the communities that we knew and really coming from this idea that many of the main organizers, actually all of the main organizers of this group, came from communities that had already been marginalized by mainstream Christianity. And so coming with that posture of recognizing like Palestinians are being marginalized by much of the Christian community, the loudest Christian voices by far, the biggest Christian voices by far have been Christian Zionists. By the way, there are more Christian Zionists than Jewish Zionists by like 10, 20 times. Christians United for Israel is the largest pro-Israel organization in the country, and it claims to have more members than there are Jews that live in the US. So we're talking about a massive movement. And we recognize that for us as Christians who have been marginalized by Christianity, we did not want this colonial racist idea of Christianity to be the one that carried the day. We needed to have a voice of opposition to that. We needed to have a voice in solidarity for Palestinians in Gaza, particularly, who are under a genocide right now. And so we invited people to organize politically, locally, and there were over 20 actions at local representatives' offices. And then we invited them all to come to DC to participate in a larger arrestable action. And we wanted to do something that was both symbolic and also something that went beyond symbolism, but actually disrupted the lives of those people who were in Congress who were making the decisions to cut off food to children, who were making the decisions to defund UNRWA, who were making the decisions to send more bombs to Israel. So we went to the Senate cafeteria and we blocked the food lines so that all of the staffers and senators and lobbyists who were hoping to get a quick meal and get on with their day had to listen to us say prayers for food to go to Gaza. Listen to us sing songs from our tradition that also uplifted feeding the hungry. And through this powerful action, we were able to first off, about 50 people were arrested. Half of them were clergy. Over half of them, this was the first time they had ever taken that step of doing a direct action and being arrested. So we were getting people to be more engaged. We were getting Christians specifically to be more engaged. And in preparation for that, we did political education about Christian Zionism, helping Christians recognize that we have skin in this game too. You know, it was Christian Zionists in Britain and Christian Zionists in the US who supported the Jewish Zionist attempts to colonize Palestine, who had the kind of political and military power to make that colonization a reality. And so Christians have a stake in this as well. And we were able to then, you know, go into that action very prayerfully. We had a worship service beforehand, so that people could connect spiritually before taking that very, very public action. Cole, I'll pass it back to you to share about what we're doing next.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Like that, I think it's difficult to convey in this kind of setting what's happening kind of in the gaps of this emerging movement. I'm one of the people behind our Instagram account, which is a very funny role for me as a self-identified grandpa. Not that grandpas can't be really awesome at social media, but one of the things as videos came out from the action in DC and other pieces of our engagement were made more public, the outpouring of affirmation and engagement from people for whom Christianity was their religion of upbringing, but had long become a thing that they didn't resonate with, or that they'd been harmed by, and had walked away from because it was harmful or hypocritical or any number of other reasons. Looking at this emerging effort to, in some ways, reclaim a Christian tradition that is liberatory, that is queer and trans centering and led, that is multiracial, and a Christianity that seeks to divorce itself from empire. And it's a big undertaking. But I think that ultimately what we see across all religions is that when they wed themselves to empire, all kinds of violence and bad things ensue. And so in addition to clarifying, we are an organization dedicated to challenging Christian Zionism and also mobilizing Christians as a majority. Christians hold a vast majority of the US population, which should be an asset, right? If effectively mobilized under a liberatory theology, right? But we're also seeking to build within the organization and movement a culture that can't be wrestled away from us so easily, right? So very like specifically speaking, for folks who want to plug into Christians for Free Palestine, our next community call is coming up on the 28th, and I'll look to one of my comrades to drop a link in the chat. And then further down the line, what we're building toward this summer is a gathering in DC that will challenge Christians United for Israel as they come together for their annual national summit. As Jonathan was saying, Christians United for Israel claims to be and is the largest and most powerful pro-Israel organization in the United States. And so it is an essential pillar in the ongoing US support that enables the state of Israel to enact the violence that it is enacting. And it is a critical piece of the larger project of challenging the US's blank check to the state of Israel and a particular role that Christians need to play. So that is a central piece of our focus. Anything else I'm missing? Sarah, you want to jump in?
I think I'm gonna really move right into the next question, Rebecca, unless you'd like to say it, because where I want to jump in is with then like, why should Queer Mikveh Project care? Like, great, Christians are doing work on the left. Finally, thank you. Where y'all been, right? You know, we've been embedded with y'all. You know, we've been hanging out, like, you know, learning, moving and grooving in places that where we sense the sacred. And why I would suggest that maybe, should you feel so moved to help connect with this, is because the heart of what we care about in our religious traditions, which I consider to be long social movements that have existential claims to which people make different choices, of the heart of a lot of those is at stake right now. And I think that we need each other. Christians Unite for Israel seeks to unite Christians and Jews for a particular end times theology. And this is what has some of what has been explained. It's so important to understand that. I would like to see us coming together to continue to move to our like shared roots in civilization critique. Because in both of our texts, we have that. We also have shared roots in the divine feminine, which is not yet lost. We also have lots and lots of stories that could inspire us about self-governance. Like, who do we want to be together when things are difficult? And I have found that being in this space, not only where we're wrestling with the divine, but where we're like really feeling that the divine is wrestling with us together alongside us in this quest for the memory to stay with us that all land is sacred, all people are chosen, is really strong when we're doing it together across our different truth claims. And you know, the past didn't go anywhere in terms of how anti-Semitism continues to be alive and well. And so in as much as you feel strength to stay close with us as we do this work, we want to be accountable to people like you who are unapologetically living into questioning and queering your tradition. So those are some things that I find really inspirational. And also, the last bit will be about the watershed itself in the Eastern Mediterranean and some of our shared accountabilities that we might have to that place. Not just whose is it? In fact, not even that question, but how's it and how are we to it in terms of, yeah, being in devotion to what is happening, for example, to the Jordan River there. A river that has signified so much holiness and so much in life transition and initiations and all these things. And it's a polluted trickle in some spots. And so the work that you all are doing around fundraising for the well, but also just the work that you all are doing with the water, because all the water is connected, every water is one, I think helps us think about accountabilities to watersheds. And not only there, but I can, you know, we think about our accountabilities to the watersheds where we're at. But for me, as a Christian person, I need to ask myself, what does it mean for me to be a disciple of an indigenous wisdom tradition from the Eastern Mediterranean? Christianity came politically into my life through different channels that were very much impacted by colonial white supremacy. And just like I would ask myself about practices in Buddhism or other traditions that I've learned a lot from, how do I spiritually steward this and not culturally appropriate? I also need to ask that because I'm not a Palestinian Christian. Luckily, I surround myself with Palestinian Christians because I really want to be accountable within my tradition as well. And I've also really appreciated the work of Palestinian Christians to push back against getting divided against Palestinian Muslims in their society and figuring out how we can all work together. And at the same time, like, there's some specific calls that are coming from Palestinian Christians that I want the rest of Christians to pay attention to. And for me, it's important also, like, for the chance to have those calls shared, because often those calls are buried under the weight of other imperial Christian calls, and then Jewish folks get really impacted by those, but they don't have a chance to talk with Palestinian Christians. So, Jonathan, I wonder if you could talk about the Kairos moment that we're in and what some of those calls are.
Yeah, to give just a little bit more background on that, speaking as a Palestinian Christian, it's sometimes hard to talk about what Palestinian Christianity is because Palestine has been colonized by European Christians before it was colonized by European Jews, right? And to this day, you walk around Jerusalem and you'll see French flags and German flags and British flags flying above churches because colonizing powers, each church that was connected to a state wanted to get their little piece of the Holy Land. And when Europeans came, I mean, all the way back to the Crusades, when Europeans came to Palestine, they came with their version of Christianity and told the indigenous Palestinians that they were doing Christianity wrong. So there has needed to be this push for Palestinians to re-indigenize Christianity to Palestine, to say, what does it mean to read these scriptures, to do these practices as the people who living on the land that these stories came from, as the people who have stewarded this tradition in a unique way. And an incredible thing happened in response to basically the boycott, divestment, sanction movement, and that is that representatives of every different denomination in Palestine, and there are, like I said, all the churches want their little piece. So there's a lot of different Christian sects in Palestine. And representatives from all of them came together and wrote this beautiful statement called the Kairos Palestine Statement. I'm going to ask Sarah to put a link to the document in the chat. And one of the things they did is they said, as Christians living in this land, our interpretation is that Christians cannot stand for violence at all. And primarily what that means is that we cannot allow the violence of the Israeli occupation and apartheid upon us, and that we must resist through nonviolent direct action. And then they followed that up by saying, only with the support of Christians around the world will this nonviolent direct action campaign be successful. And this was, of course, built off of the South Africa Kairos document, in which South African Christians called out church complicity in apartheid and called for Christians around the world to support. And what is really incredible for me is that looking back at Christian history, there's only one other time where all of the Christians of a land renounced violence and did not participate in state violence as a whole. And the only other example I know of is Palestine in the 1st century. When the church was just founded, it was founded as a like one of the defining factors of early Christianity in Palestine was that Christians refused to participate in militarism and refused to use violence when it first started, before it became an imperial colonial tradition. So for me, the fact that the 21st century and the 1st century in Palestine had a similar defining factor of nonviolence is telling to the roots of that tradition in that place.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm going to come back on for a second to just kind of, like, I'm here taking notes too, and just to really appreciate from doing in terms of tying back in nonviolent direct action to blocking the lunch line at the Senate. You know, that is an extremely not just creative and, you know, I've been trying to think of ways that we can like clown the situation. You know, how can we bring in more a little bit chaos or shenanigans? And also it has profound symbolic significance in talking about the starvation, the man-made famine, and speaking and singing and praying about the lack of food and water in Gaza. Um, I'm just kind of want to circle back to what you guys were talking about in the beginning, which is what you're actually doing and the power, just the sheer people power in numbers of the possibility of organizing the Christian community, mobilizing Christians worldwide, I think is very, very powerful. Of course, the Jewish community is struggling to mobilize because we're kind of, you know, there are people who know that what's happening is wrong. There are people who know for decades what's happening in Palestine and the occupation and Israeli apartheid is abhorrent and needs to stop immediately. And then there's a lot of people in our community who just don't know, or they're straight up Zionists and they still support what Israel is doing. And so I think the Christian community too, you guys have a range of where people are at, but that work of, you know, working with people who inherently in your heart know that killing people is wrong from your, whether it's from your tradition or whether it's just from your human capacity of empathy and feeling for other people, in order to have political power or any kind of movement power. I think it's essential that we understand each other's landscapes. You know, what does it mean? I mean, I'm Filipino, so a lot of my Filipino family are kind of Christian Zionists. I mean, they've been to Jerusalem, they've gone and walked the path, they bathed in the waters, and you know, we're going to talk about that right now. Like, what are the ways that water and, you know, I'm really happy you brought in, Sarah, the watershed, the waters of Palestine have been co-opted by all of our traditions to serve a certain kind of political, theologic rhetoric that justifies what's happening in the occupation, what's happening in the apartheid system, what's happening in the straight up violence of Gaza and the West Bank. So maybe we can talk a little bit here about what are those strategies? How has water been kind of used in particular ways? Um, and I think the specific question is, how have Zionists used water access apartheid as a tool of colonization, and how is that playing out currently in the genocide in Gaza? So maybe you guys can talk a little bit about that. Thanks.
Thanks for that lead in, because yeah, I do want to talk about Christian baptisms in the Jordan River. So Christian tourism is a huge economic factor in that area, major income for a lot of people. And the state of Israel has intentionally tried to keep Palestinians from benefiting from Christian tourism specifically, both in making it hard for Palestinians to get permits to be tour guides, to putting out warnings for tourists and tour groups not to spend time in Palestinian cities like Bethlehem, which of course all the Christian tourists want to go to, but it always ends up being a day trip. They don't stay overnight. They're told not to go into any of the shops, things like that. And I think one of the clearest examples of this manipulation is with Christian tourists who want to be baptized, which is where Christians will it's basically Christians kind of took the mikveh idea and ran with it and did some weird things. So it's Christians going into the water to be ritually purified in a certain sense. And so Christians really want to be baptized in the Jordan River. The Jordan River holds significant religious significance, both in the Hebrew scriptures and in the Christian Testament. And what they don't want is to see what the Jordan River actually looks like, which is, as Sarah said, a trickle of sewage now. In part because Israel diverted a lot of the water from the Jordan River to make the desert bloom, and because Israel puts its industrial zones and all of its industrial waste into Israeli settlements that are on Palestinian land, and so the pollution is right there by the river as well. And the traditional sites where biblical events happened along the Jordan River are all either in Jordanian or Palestinian controlled areas. So in the 1980s, Israel created a baptismal site in the Jordan River. They pump water, fresh water from a nearby lake that is not polluted, into a pool on the river, and they invite Christian tourists to come and be baptized in that water. That location has no biblical significance. Its only significance is that it can be accessed without having to talk to a Palestinian. And so it's created, so it's a way for those Christian tourists to completely avoid any of the realities of what's there, and to have basically a like Disneyland experience, pretending that they're walking with Jesus in the Jordan River. There's a lot more that can be said about the ways that water is used, but I just want to like reflect on particularly the religious use and misuse of water, because like the Jordan River should be sacred. It really should, and it should be cared for as if it's sacred, instead of it being polluted and then a fake Jordan River being put up for Christian tourists.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I also want to just quickly add into that from the Israeli settler side, the violence of water it runs very deep, and I don't want to go too much into it because I think a lot of people, there's a lot of information that's available through orgs like B'Tselem. B'Tselem is an Israeli human rights org that tracks the water apartheid, the water theft, and the water, I would say water crimes that are happening in Palestine from on the part of the Israeli government. But one of the things that I think is relevant to this in terms of thinking about baptism and the mikveh and, the ritual bath, which is why we're all kind of came together today, is that someone was telling us a story about, you know, a Palestinian village that has a well, and I'm sure there are many of these throughout, especially in the West Bank, Palestinian wells that have been converted into Jewish mikvaot, a mikvah site. So it's in a similar way, the Christian Zionists have created these sort of like fake Disneyland baptisms where you can live the fantasy of bathing in the Jordan, ritually purifying yourself in the Jordan River. Parallel to Jewish settlers who have stolen Palestinian water, Palestinian well water, to create spaces for their own ritual purification. And so we're seeing the settler action being tangibly just kind of placed upon, erasing and stealing water from a whole community for their own personal, ritual use. And then we see on the other side, with the baptism, also some kind of divergence of water, but also for, the same kind of religious components, religious practices that inevitably harm Palestinian people and harm Palestinian life and are not good for the water either, I'm assuming. So I think, just to keep it parallel that, it's not just one community or another community. It's not just Jews. It's not just Christian Zionists who are harming. It's a kind of whole structure of imperialist and colonialist and religiously fueled oppression that I think all of us have a responsibility to in a certain way because of our teachings and because our teachings tell us that water is sacred and that life is sacred, that these things shouldn't be happening in the name of our religious thinking or religious belief system. So I wanted to throw that in there, but I know there's other things that we want to speak about in terms of Palestinian rights issues. If anyone wants to speak about what kind of water rights organizing is happening in Palestine, or if any of you want to talk to anything around water rights issues, go ahead.
I'll just drop in visualizing Palestine's beautiful work in this regard, which has some of the data that you mentioned. And yeah, it just takes us to this really intense climactic moment, as in with the climate that we're also living in this time. So entitled Between a Rising Tide and Apartheid, this visual can aid in presentations you're doing, or even just as a meditation on the multifaceted challenges of this moment. Many people know about how difficult it is to get a house permit in Palestine, the hoops you need to jump through, the constant denial, the dehumanizing process. The same is true with much other infrastructure. And when you need to dig a well, it means heavy machinery. It means, that you may not be able to access water depending on who you are and where you are. And even in places sometimes where Palestinians do still have some land, the question of who owns in an ownership framework under various sets of settler colonial laws, be they Ottoman, British, current Israeli, or otherwise, may be able to snatch that water out from under you and say, it's fine, you stay on this land, but the water is ours. So what does it mean to be on land without water? Like, what, do you still feel at home? Or do you desert that space for the sake of the water? And so I think for me, this is what I think about when I hear from the river to the sea. Like I actually think about those actual water bodies. I think about I mean, Jesus, or sometimes known as Yeshua, spent a lot of time on water, mostly outside, hang with a bunch of other folks, learning botany. Some of the analogies and parables that he uses shows that he was really in a learning mode in terms of which seeds were actually the smallest. If you read some of the Christian scriptures, it's really touching how it's like Jesus is trying to disciple himself to his watershed where he shows up. Although I really do think Jesus' pronouns are they. We can get into a Trinitarian discussion later, but all the ways that they acted, excuse me, let me not misgender them. Super queer, very egalitarian, really transgressing, and really this invitation to those who are already on the margins of their society to be like, it's not only in the future, we can create our community now. They did that all around the Sea of Galilee. That was their favorite hangout spot. Let's just go chill on the beach. Let's talk about this stuff, like what's really happening? Like, what are we going through under Roman military occupation? What else is possible when we create our own family? You know what I mean? Family, like all of these things, these were the inquiries. And when they got tired, they would often get on a boat and go out into the water. Sometimes storms would rage. Sometimes it'd be calm. Sometimes they'd be working with the weather, but there's just like a lot there that is very much, in many ways, an internal conversation for the most part within the Jewish community, although consistently saying, but isn't that Syrophoenician woman in? But isn't that widow of Zarephath in? Constantly already challenging where the community drew its boundaries and inviting the other to become central. So how I would tie that to today is some of the creative ways that Palestinians are calling on folks from around the world to assist them in being able to quench their thirst, right? Hence this particular fundraiser that you all are doing or others, but it's going to take all of us. And already people are not drinking enough. And my personal work is in like toilets and the back end of water justice and all of that. And one of the first targets of the siege, or when Israel applied the siege on Gaza, was a wastewater treatment plant. And when you don't clean your water, it has an impact on the whole water cycle. So those are some things that I would bring up with regards to what's happening with water.
Thank you, Sarah. Sitting up on the hour here, and we're gonna keep talking a little bit, but I do want to add a note. Maybe someone could drop a link into the chat that this is a fundraiser. I know people have been already making donations. Thank you for everyone, to everyone who has already donated. And I wanted to plug the fundraiser for Sana's family, who's actually now they're in Deir al-Balah, but they're building a well in that community that they're in. The update hasn't been posted onto the GoFundMe yet. We just sent an email out in our newsletter. Maybe you received that, and there's a post about it on our Instagram. But if you're going to, thanks, Kyle. If you're going to the fundraiser and you want to donate there directly, you can do that. You can also send it to our we have a PayPal or a Venmo, and we're just sending all the funds directly to Sana, basically, and to support her family who are digging a well, essentially. And the messages that we're receiving, because invasion of Rafah, the bombing of Rafah, and the, again, multiple displacements and the moving of people back up to the north of Gaza, we're seeing a lot more people coming back into areas that have been evacuated. And so, of course, there's no water. There's no water anywhere, but families, community members are trying to supply water for people. And this is one of the projects that is helping support water in this area. So we want to, I'm just going to plug again, if you haven't donated already, please do that now. And if you want to donate again, you can do that now too. Even if it's $5, you know, that stuff, that the money does go a far way. So we're really grateful for everyone who's already supported us in this project and supported Sana's family in this project. Gonna keep going here, and I also want to say we also have a water ritual component that we'll do probably for the last 15 or 20 minutes of this call. We're scheduled to be on a 2-hour time block. I think we're on a good time frame now. And for that, what we call mikveh, or what anyone could call a water ritual, there's a opportunity for folks to run a hot bath. If you want to literally get into the bathtub, we've always like to support people. If they want to do that, you can turn your camera off. You could just come on like from right here. However you want to do that. I'll cue you later if you want to run your hot bath. That'll probably be in the next 20 minutes or so. So it's still hot and you can, you know, bathe in the ritual way, which is, yeah, dunking in the water. So I'm giving everyone a heads up you can think about if you want to do that. And you also have the option of just making a hot cup of tea or just having a glass of water. That works too. Okay, everyone okay? Shall we continue? Awesome. So this is another question that I think is some of the more juicy stuff. We've gone through some of the political setup and the understanding what is Christian Zionism. We're understanding how people are mobilizing. We're understanding how the state of Israel functions as a system of oppression over the Palestinian people and Palestinian land and water. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about metaphor. And so the question for you all is, how does water function as both a metaphor for liberation and a literal material life source in both traditions? And so I'll chime in a little bit too, but I would like to hear from y'all. Yeah, what can we learn from the water?
Well, as a Cancer, which astrologically is a water sign, it wouldn't be a queer event if we didn't talk about astrology at some point, right? I have a fondness for water, certainly. And as I was thinking about this question, one a piece of scripture that came up for me, as a queer person, as a trans person, Christianity hasn't always felt like a safe home for me, and oftentimes it still doesn't. But I've nonetheless dedicated myself to kind of like throwing elbows into Christian hegemony and fighting for liberatory forms of religion and spirituality. And Soul Force has been a really critical part of that journey for me. Soul Force is an LGBTQ justice org that the tagline is sabotaging Christian supremacy. So that's what Soul Force is about. And Soul Force was the first organization to invite me into more proactive theology. So I had done a lot of defensive theology of like, you want to tell me about Sodom and Gomorrah, like, let me break that down for you about what that story is actually about. One of the other, but like defensive theology for me is exhausting after a while, right? You're just trying to go tit for tat with people who ultimately aren't seeking transformation. Proactive theology is a way of looking to scripture, looking to sacrament as a tool toward liberation. And one of the texts that has been really powerful for me is to look at the story of creation. And in the story of creation, which many of us share, we're given this really basic account of God created darkness and light, God created land and water, God created this and that, and declared that it was all good. And what's been transformative for me is to realize that God created a lot of things in between those elements as well, right? So in between darkness and light, God created the sunset and the sunrise. In between land and water, God created the ebb and flow of the tides. And the tide is extremely powerful. It is a thing that is always with us. And it reminds me that there's so much in between these dichotomies that we know exist, and that also we can imagine into existence, that proves to us that there are paths forward. So I'll kick us off with just that piece, leaning into like how we find paths toward liberation through scripture, through ritual that has otherwise been co-opted.
I'm gonna let my flow go here, even though it's tangential. But Cole, with you speaking to the astrological and like arrangement, it makes me think of the moon and something I was learning about before around moon colonization and moon mining. And if they change the face of the moon, will it impact the tide? Like thinking about the moon and saying, I don't know if it's like make it a state park or what you got to do these days, but like, to make sure that nobody, but like just this moment of the intensity of the crisis that we're in, that some of that in between is trying to be narrowed by our engineering, when we really all just need to like sit down and take a bath, like to go back to this thing and just think about the depth of interconnection you brought me to. I just wanted to share that. And may the moon be safe, may the tides and all the in between be safe. And having given birth kind of recently, and I see there's some little ones on as well, Rev Addie, and I can hear our little one upstairs, not yet going to bed, but trying to participate in the webinar. I think about, just the waters from whence we came. And as a breastfeeding person, learning about how difficult it is to breastfeed in Gaza right now, because if you can't get enough nutrition, just the impact that has, your body still wants to give, and just the way that's creating a lot of tension at a moment where the flow could be one of bonding, should be one of bonding. And the terrors of what's happening are so intimate, as well as life and death. That I'm thinking about the impact of lack of water and food on the generation. So the waters of the womb, and also in many traditions, the washing of the bodies before death or as part of funerary rites. And so these skipped rites for fear of movement, but also for not as much, but there have been a lot of tears. So our bodies continue to put out this water and sweat. I mean, this type of thing. It's very interesting to think about our minuscule yet 70% bodies of water and how they're interacting. Thank you.
Yeah, thinking about water for liberation metaphorically, I think about the Palestinian Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center, which named itself Sabeel. And Sabeel may have been one of the early terms for the Christian movement, is often translated as the way. And it also means the path or the stream. It's like following the water, actually, would be another way of putting it. And the idea that in one of the most clear ways that Palestinians have tried to reclaim our indigenous Christianity, that the name that they chose was Sabio, was connected to the water, is really meaningful to me.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, that is such a beautiful metaphor just in terms of following the water, um, following the stream. I was really thinking about, and Cole, you kind of mentioned at the beginning, just the creation story. I think growing up, I went to a Zionist grade school, grew up in Jewish Zionism, and we would read the Torah, we would read in Hebrew, we would study the different stories. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's just, I don't know exactly why. It just always stuck in my mind the most is the creation story. Yeah, like Tohu Vavohu. Tohu Vavohu is the Hebrew. Yeah, chaos, all the crazy stuff, nothing, we don't know what was going on. It was just like the blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And that I remember recently reading, maybe last year, rereading the Hebrew script, and I don't have it in front of me, so I apologize. I don't want to try to look it up, but in the beginning there was tohu vivohu, there was chaos, and the Spirit of God hovered above the water. And again, I don't have the Hebrew version, but that to me, I reread that when I was kind of rethinking about mikveh and studying more about what is Jewish relationship to water. It's literally right there, right in the beginning. You don't even have to go past, you can be in the hotel, pull out the Bible from the thing, and it's the first thing. It's literally like, you don't even have to read a whole paragraph. And to me, I was kind of like stunned that I never really noticed that element before. Like, I remember the tohu vavohu, but I don't remember the spirit over the water. And I just really think, I mean, in all human practices, in all human cultures, water is our sacred life. It is us. And when I think about how can we do this work, I mean, of course, everyone's struggling. The friends I have in Japan are like, what can we do? What is the thing that we can do? And there are laundry lists of things we can do that are money or political or talking about it or putting on social media. But I have a deep, deep sense that the work that we do with water, like whether it's a meditation or it's a spiritual practice or it's some kind of consideration of the fact that we are all this stuff, like this divine and material stream. Like, I have a deep sense of hope in understanding that, despite the, yeah, again, crimes against water that are being committed in all of the names. I have a deep, I don't know if it's, yeah, I don't understand it, but I have a sense that we have to keep paying attention to it and we have to keep staying with the stream, as it were, being with the water, going to the water. And we know that in Gaza, the people are being supported by the ocean. The ocean is that sense of place and belonging and hope and vision and health for the community in Gaza right now. I mean, if the ocean, I think about it all the time because I also lived in Hawaii for many years, and the water is the healing place for everyone. It is that place that people go when don't know where to go. You just go sit on the ocean and you can ponder, your life, your reality, what's happening, the divine. And so, yeah, I think again, from the river to the sea, everyone wants to twist this speaking of the land, the speaking of the liberation of Palestine, or just any river to any sea, because it's everywhere all over the world, but we're talking specifically about Palestine, but that the liberation of our land and our waters is at the heart of this conversation. And I don't want us to I don't know, like, to me, that phrase and the distraction of thinking about whether that's the wrong thing to say or if it's anti-Semitic or blah blah blah, that is a distraction of the actual fucking words, which is speaking of our bodies of water, which are us, which are the Palestinian people. And I think it is important for all of us to continue whatever the work we're doing, that water should be part of that, an essential experience and material and metaphorical part of our work. So yeah, I'm just like, so I love you guys so much. I'm so grateful for you for breaking it all down and help us understand, yeah, how are we connected in these ways. Um, I think I think we have time for a couple of questions, so I don't want to talk too much more. I'm going to read a comment here that just came in. Thinking about the presence of water in these and other stories is so meaningful and has me thinking about the water cycle. The water we have is all the water that there ever was. All of our own water rituals and our daily interactions with water may well be with the same waters that ran through Holy Lands in these texts, and now they run through us. I love that. I love that too, the water cycle, and water doesn't go anywhere. It just changes form. And so I think that's another way that we could think about, if our prayer and our hope and our love for Palestine also goes into the water, that is something that is circulating in the world, that is just part of it. So just, yeah, thanks everyone for your comments there. I'm gonna flip back to our document to see if we have any questions. No, I'm just going to open it up if folks have questions, or if anyone, I didn't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to share a question or has, here we go, a clarification. Here we go. There's a lot of Jewish people alongside Muslims in this fight. Curious to know if Christians are forming solidarity blocks with Muslims in specific ways. Thanks.
The Christians who are out there doing actions, yes. I think it needs to happen more, and it's something that should be prioritized. I will say the next action that Christians for Free Palestine is planning is to confront Christians United for Israel at their annual summit and lobby day, when they are going to be trying to push their extremist and violent agenda in Congress, that we want to find ways to disrupt that. And we are doing it specifically as a coalition action with Jewish organizations around DC, Muslim organizations, as well as having a full interfaith rally outside of the Christians United for Israel action. Because, as Sarah mentioned earlier, Christians United for Israel has a vision of what interfaith relationships look like and what Christian-Jewish relationships look like. And it's one of Christians being supremacist and all others doing what Christians want. And we need to show an alternative to that.
Thanks, Jonathan.
And I
Yeah,
just,
Oh, go ahead, Sarah, go ahead.
I'm gonna put in the chat something I've heard Christians for a Free Palestine talk about a lot too, just like wanting to give a shout out to the Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity, which was created to be a refuge and a haven, and in the absence of some of the intersectional leadership has said yes to this moment, and is also led in part by trans-Palestinian person. And so that is like another part of our emergent crew, right? And so yeah, just want to give them a shout out today, as well as many other orgs.
Thank you, Sarah. That's an awesome resource and awesome org. I see a couple of people have their hands raised. It would be helpful if folks could put their questions in the chat too, but John, go ahead.
Yes, hello, hi. Coming to you from Boorloo, which is in Western Australia, Palestinian Christian here. Just to, I just wanted to sort of share how a little bit about how we're engaging with the Christian Zionists here, because there's much more conservative, as my friend Halo on the call will know, in Perth. And one of the ways I think that's been, in terms of challenging them, is to sort of use their narratives against them a little bit. So, for example, with Indigenous organizations here in Australia, a lot of them are Zionist funded, and they're funded by these really powerful bodies. And so, you know, encouraging some of our Aboriginal friends to turn to them and say, well, thank you for your support for funding our organization. We're so grateful that you support Indigenous rights. Would you issue a statement doing a demographic reversal of Australia, given that we're the Indigenous people, just like you did in Palestine, you know, as a testament to your support. So I think that there are, there are ways, and I'm writing them out, so I'm happy to share those, a few ways to just, here the disruption piece doesn't really resonate with people at all. It's not understood in an Australian context. So we're having to sort of be a bit sort of smart and witty about it. But yeah, happy to share those. And thank you so much for this call. It's been really wonderful, and look forward to connecting more.
Thanks, John. Mags, do you want to hop on and then we'll take a quick break?
Yeah, sure. Something I've been thinking about a lot is that when I try to talk to fellow Christians who are motivated by their faith to try to advocate for justice, a lot of the times there's a tendency I see where they will respond to other Christians, like mainstream American Christianity, who they see as not really upholding the values that are important to them in the faith. They will sort of try to describe them as not real Christians, or like not really as true to the faith as like I and them are. I have some difficulties with that. I think you don't get to disavow that kind of damage from your co-religionists, and I think that it sort of obstructs possibilities to maybe have more dialogue within the faith and like mobilize that large block of Christians in the United States, for example. And this has been a real impasse for me in conversations sometimes. And I was just wondering how y'all think about that, how people in the chat think about that. What are some ways to approach that kind of difficulty?
Go ahead, Cole. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, certainly I've seen a lot of that also in social media chats and such, of affirming like, oh, this is what real Christianity is. And one thing that we've talked about as a group is that like Christianity is what Christians do, right? And I don't think that attempting to say that somebody who's expressing a different theology or taking action in a different kind of way is somehow less Christian. That's not to say that we can't be critical of their actions and engage in their theology. But yeah, I think that one of the ways that the right continues to gain power is through tactics of divide and conquer, right? And we see that playing out in all kinds of movements, right? Because I work closely in Jewish communities, watching like Jewish communities split, right, in really, really painful ways, and seeing progressive movements also split in this moment, and what division, what isolation serves ultimately is rising authoritarianism. And so when I see efforts to kind of like also drive wedges within Christian communities rather than motivate us to like lean into conflict and come out hopefully in a stronger and like collectively more liberated way, I feel suspicious, and I want to push back on that. Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely agree with what Cole said. I also want to share that for Christians for Free Palestine's organizing, we don't spend much time trying to convince Christian Zionists that Christian Zionism is wrong. Instead, we want to spend our time creating the Christianity that we want to see in the world. And part of that is exposing all forms of racism and oppression, and particularly the ones that are within our tradition. And so when we are challenging Christians United for Israel, we're not there to evangelize Christians United for Israel. We're there to expose one of the most influential and harmful lobbies in the US. And expose and disrupt one of the most harmful lobbies in the US.
And just like the last thing that I'll say is, I always find beautiful trouble, spectrum of allies really helpful. So Mags, that person may be, and everyone, actually an active opponent. Maybe even if imagining themselves as a neutral or even an ally, but really they're quite an active opponent. And what I've observed in talking about alternatives to Christian Zionism, for many Christians who deeply want to be faithful, when they learn that they can be faithful without being Christian Zionists, there's a huge sigh of relief to know that there's a way to do this thing in which everyone experiences love, safety, health, human rights, all of these things. And so I've actually had a lot of hopeful conversations. Your faith can still hold water and can do so in such a way that makes space for all and for your own questions. So yeah, and for those who are, again, like see themselves like Palestinians need to do particular certain things, hey, I just, I'm getting clearer and clearer about who I'm talking to and adjusting the message accordingly, which the very Christian thing to do, as we see it in the scripture that says, like, make sure you're able always to give the testimony of the hope that lives within you and be able to do it in such a way that you may be heard, right? And even if you don't have the words, there's an invitation to like draw on that Ruach Elohim, to draw on that Holy Spirit to mediate as well. So I'm not sure what a spectrum of allies surrounded by the Holy Spirit looks like, but that's what I'm into. And that's what I said when I have a chance to organize with Christians for a Free Palestine, with Queer Mikveh Project, and others, right? Like the transcendent is here and through all of this. And so it's a blessing to be a part of it.
Yeah, if I can just add one other thing is, when in our early days, we still are like Christians for Free Palestine. Is, I think we're going on 6 months right now. But as we were first coming into formation, there were some big questions about whether, in order to build a big enough movement to have the powerful we need, would we need to make theological compromises, ideological compromises about like how we like who we collaborate with, who we draw in, and it has both been like reassuring and extremely powerful to find both that the leadership team is unwilling to make those compromises and that we haven't needed to, that there are enough people of Christian origin who are compelled into the type of Christianity that we are seeking to embody and live into and build, that we don't have to like, yeah, we don't have to make compromises. And that gives me a lot of hope, a lot of faith as somebody who has struggled to feel those things sometimes. And the other thing I'll say is, just as a community organizer, one of my rules is that I cannot effectively organize people whom I don't love. And so it's been really important for me to also ground myself in a love for people who come from a tradition and that has sometimes caused harm to me, has caused harm to probably most everybody on this call in some form or fashion, but that the like people themselves are not my enemy, that the ideologies, the theologies that they have learned, those are our enemies, and those are the things that we need to defeat and present alternatives to as we build a new path forward.
Thanks so much, Cole. Yeah, thanks everyone for just such a beautiful conversation. And I know there's so many, we still have some more questions coming in. We're going to move into our ritual component now, if everyone's cool with that. I think let's take a let's take a 5-minute break so everyone can go to the bathroom and get your setup, whatever you need for your water. I'll describe a little bit, just briefly, the options you have. I said earlier, you can make yourself a hot cup of tea. You could just get a glass of water for yourself. If you feel like getting into the bath, that the queue for the bath was put into the chat, but you can run your hot water right now real quick if that's something you want to do. And we'll describe a little bit more about what is mikveh in a minute. But yeah, just everyone take a 5-minute break so you can refresh and come back, and we're going to come into ritual space. So yeah, please join us in 5. Thank you. Back on. So hopefully everyone had a moment to get your water in whatever form it's coming in. I chose the booby mug for our mommies and non-mommies, all boobies, free the nipple. All right. So welcome back, everybody. We're going to move into our ritual portion of today's meeting. And I'm going to read a short statement. Rebecca Arov is here, her QMP team member. And they're also going to describe what is a mikveh. So maybe, Rebecca, do you want to start actually in describing what is mikveh, what is queer mikveh, and then we'll move into our ritual.
Hey everyone. It's such a joy to be here. I was actually on the whole time, but I was picking my parents up from the airport, so I was on the phone and just Sarah, Jonathan, and Cole and Rebecca you're enlightening my family. So thank you. And I'm just feel teary-eyed because I'm so moved by this conversation and by the really important solidarity work that I feel this conversation is really deepening between Jews and Christians and beyond. So thank you so much that we can be like water together and flow together in the direction towards Palestinian liberation. And yeah, mikveh, and I'm so glad everything you shared, Jonathan, about and Rebecca, about so much about how water, what's happening, the use of baptism and misuse and in Palestine. And yeah, mikveh is a Jewish ritual, and as I like to think about it, actually like pre-Jewish. So, we know that all over the world, people use water for in ritual for transformation, for cleansing, and that before Jews were Jews, before God told Abraham to smash all the idols, there were people who were more based in the feminine, earth-based spirituality and reverence for the earth and using water in deep reverence. And so that's when all our people were all, as I like to think about it, one in terms of this reverence. And for whatever reason, humans have had to take this path around violence. But the water is always our teacher and always helps us come back to who we are, because we're mostly made out of water. So the mikveh is immersing in water. When you're born, that's the original mikveh, that you living in utero, you're living in the waters, and then you go through a transformation from being inside a body to being in the world. That's everyone has that same shared mikveh experience. And then we can use this again throughout our lives to immerse in water, or if that is not accessible to us in a moment, we can drink water, we can pour water over us with the intention to let it change us, to give us strength to collectively come together and do ritual together towards an intention, in this case, for a free Palestine. And what makes it queer, as a friend Joe Singer says, is what makes it queer is basically we're queer and we're doing it. And so we yeah, and we really queered it with Queer Mikveh Project in this invitation. And my friend Zolev Cunningham first introduced the teacup mikveh to us, of like okay, mikvah on the spot. You don't have time to get all the way into a body of water, but you need to have a reminder of the divine's assistance to change you, to transform you, and to collect, and in this case, to collectively move together like water. That's how we do.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I'm going to read our text, and then we're going to collectively read a text together, and Oren will share that image in the text when in the chat when we're ready. So here we go. And you can just ground in however you need to. Everyone feel free to, if you need to close your eyes or just listen. I'm just holding my cup of water in front of me.
Rebecca, also, can we say this is a ritual written by our friend Rosa Blumenfeld Romero? And I don't know, maybe I interrupted you. You were going to say that, sorry.
No, it's fine. Yes, this is so the first section, the introduction, I think is not Rosa's words, but the actual mikveh words are. So shout out to Rosa, and there have been some people mentioning Rosa's previous workshop on whether or not Jews are indigenous. Are Jews indigenous? Rosa has been brought up in the chat earlier today too. So shout out to you, Rosa. We love you. Okay, so I'm going from here. Hi. So today we are gathering to use our intention, our prayer, our voices, our bodies, and our ritual technologies to bring an end to the genocide in Gaza. We know the horror and atrocities that are being committed, the massacre of civilians on a large scale, most especially in Gaza, most especially the children and young people of Palestine, disabled and injured people, the violent displacement and theft of more land in the West Bank, the doubling of the number of Palestinian prisoners. We're here to hold each other in our heartbreak and to strengthen each other for what we know has been and will continue to be a long path. As the Queer Mikveh team, we are very grateful for each of you. And together, all of our prayers, in whatever way, whatever language, whatever style, are meaningful in this moment. This is why we've chosen to Queer Mikveh, the Jewish practice of ritual water immersion, so that anyone can use the power of our connection to water to make change, whether that's supporting Indigenous water rights or a local movement to protect, restore, or liberate the waters. Palestine has been in a water crisis for 75 years. We encourage everyone to do your self-study on the role of water in this situation. Historically, settlers have attacked water wells, poisoning them, filling them in with concrete, and in one case that we recently heard and that I mentioned earlier, settlers in the South Hebron Hills have converted a Palestinian water source into a mikveh. Water tanks have been targeted and destroyed over the past 8 months, and it was recently reported that, of course, medical staff, and this is like already for months now, have been only drinking an ounce or 30 milliliters of water per day. Water is sacred. We are water, and we're here today to honor the one thing that connects all of us. So our prayers today will go towards the following goals: stopping all weapons to Israel, an immediate and permanent ceasefire, freeing up the hostages, the release of all Palestinian prisoners, ending the occupation, and finally the dismantling of the entire Israeli apartheid system. These may seem like daunting tasks, but we truly believe that this is possible, especially joined hand in hand with peoples all around the world, from the Zapatistas to the Movement for Black Lives, to the dock workers in Belgium, the people of South Africa, Aotearoa, labor unions in India, healthcare workers in the Philippines, and of course the people of Palestine, and Israel, including refugees and all people of the region who all deserve safety and freedom from oppression, corrupt governments, death, and destruction. Our futures are bound together. So we're going to move into the prayer that Rosa has written called Mikveh Water Ritual for Palestinian Life. So let's see, there's 4 of us, yeah? Okay. I'll start and then we can pass it around. We don't have an order, so whoever wants to go can just jump in if that's okay. So, intention. This is to be read at the water's edge before entering the mikveh. So this is the words of Rosa Blumenfeld. We enter these sacred waters, heavy with grief for the genocide being enacted on our Palestinian cousins by our Israeli kin. We pray that this ritual will restore some space that war takes away, will help us retain our sanity in these horrifying times, and bring peace to our hearts and our lands. All war is a land grab, and we will not sit idly by as Palestinian bloodlines are wiped out, but we will remember that all hearts can soften. Genocide never fully succeeds in killing a people, and that Mother Earth is still caring and generous with us, even in these hard times. Love is still the most powerful force on earth, and we choose love and life with this immersion.
So the first immersion, as you descend into the water, say these words before immersing yourself completely, or say these words just before you bring the cup to your lips, or bring the water into your thoughts. As we move into these waters, may they open our hearts to give us courage, strength, and faith to keep witnessing, fighting, and telling the truth about what is happening to the Palestinian people. May their ancestors forgive our people for the crimes we are committing in the name of our ancestors. May we face the unfaceable, bear the unbearable, and forgive the unforgivable.
For the second immersion, as we immerse in these waters, we honor the richness and precious spirits of every Palestinian life that has been stolen by this war. We love you and we will never forget you. May you have a safe journey home across the Milky Way to your ancestors.
The third immersion. As we immerse in these waters, we pray and pledge to do all we can for an immediate ceasefire, an end to the occupation, and freedom and justice for all.
Amen. L'chaim. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. Thank you to Rosa for sharing those words, and thanks to Rebecca for leading us into the ritual space. And we have one more component of today, which I'm going to pass the mic to Kyle, who's going to lead us in a song.
This is a song written by Sol Weiss, and it's a translation of the Hebrew prayer for mikvah. Great waters pour over us, for we are your children. Make us yours again. Great waters, pour over us. Heal our broken places. Make us whole again. Great waters, pour over us. Prepare us for this love you've given us, for we are yours again. For we are yours again.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Kyle, so much. I love your voice so much. You have such a beautiful voice. Thank you. Well, we are like right on time somehow. It must have been perfect timing. But I just want to say, so just give so much gratitude to Christians for Free Palestine and Queer Mikveh Project, collab coming in hot with the water theologies. Love you guys so much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Cole. Thank you, everyone who's on this call. Orin, best tech person ever. Audra, Aaron for the ASL interpretation. Y'all are freaking awesome. And I am so blessed to be in community for Free Palestine with all of these incredible, incredible organizers, people, queer people, non-queer people, whatever it is, wherever you are. Thank you for being here. And we really hope that you can continue your work and that today helped you feel the strength and the unity of all of us in what we're doing. We're going to plug the fundraiser one more time, and we're going to send all of the links and all of the amazing resources in an email. So if you're like, oh, that person drop that link. It's okay. We're gonna send it out in the email. So please, oh, gallery view. Yeah, everyone, please feel free to just turn on your cameras. If anyone wants to give thanks, you can go ahead and do that and unmute. But we're gonna wrap it up here, and we're just really grateful for all of you. And guess what? It's happening. We're moving towards a free Palestine. We can see it. We can see it, and we're all making it happen. So thank you all for everything that you're already doing. Thanks for the folks in the bathtubs. And yeah, go ahead if anyone wants to unmute for some gratitude.
Well, just want to say thank you to Rebecca for facilitating and Rebecca and Kyle for all the organizing to make this happen, and just all the stuff that went into this moment.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
We
Thanks,
pray that
everyone.
your strength would continue to move you forward.
Thank you. Sending so much love over the water. Much love.